I think we're just about ready to get started here, Julie. So it's 10:01. We'll let folks take a few moments to get settled in. We got a lot of people joining, so welcome. At the beginning, I'm going to be joined by Julie Fry, the CEO at California Humanities, longtime partner and collaborator, and helping to convene us here today. Julie, welcome.
Thanks very much, Joaquin. Thanks everybody who's joining us. We'd also like to see Laure and Juliette on screen as well at this time.
Laure and Juliette, please join us. There we go. Hello. Laure, would you like to introduce yourself just briefly, and Juliette, please?
Yes, hi, I'm Laure Gayet. I'm urbanist. I do participatory urbanism, and I also work with Légendes, Urbaines as a consultant on projects crossing arts and urban development.
Awesome, welcome, it's good to have you. And Juliette?
Hi, so I'm Juliette. I'm the cultural attaché of the French Cultural Services of the French Embassy in the US. I'm based in San Francisco and I have been here for 3 years.
Excellent. And Julie, perhaps you need no introduction, but it's always good to remind people, or at least invoke the great depth and work of the California Humanities.
Thanks for that, Joaquin. As a former board member, you know exactly what to say. So California Humanities has been around for almost 45 years as a statewide nonprofit, and we make grants and deliver programs that really help to connect people, histories, cultures, share ideas, create inquiry, which is why this particular project that you're going to hear about today is really a wonderful way for us to practice the humanities on an international stage.
And yes, and this is perhaps no better time than to really think about some of these questions. I'll go back a little bit in time when Gavin Newsom was the governor, was originally coming into being the mayor in San Francisco. I got a chance to work with him on a project that was known as Digital Sister Cities at that time. And the mayor of Paris, Mayor Donadieu at the time, came in and was the first signatory. And that led to this incredible set of relationships and collaborations. And I had the chance to visit there. But it was when I went to Saint-Denis that I really sort of saw the potential. This was a long time ago also at this point. And I was so, it was remarkable when Julie mentioned to me that this was all happening, because I'd been an expat from Oakland doing some local journalism work in Seattle for the last year. And I was amazed. It was incredible. But Juliette, for everyone's benefit, will you give a little background on the work that you do and what the project objectives are from your perspective, and just a little bit of color on the collaboration so far?
Thank you, yes. So I think, you know, this morning, and I'm really delighted to release the publication, Oakland Saint-Denis Translating Cities and Culture. This has been, I think, an amazing journey between California and France. And the project started with one conviction, is making a city is a cultural act. We need to empower arts communities in our cities. We need to invite them to be part of the discussion in urban development. And I think it's, yes, we face many challenges today, and we are coming from very different cultures, from very different history, but we face gentrification, social and racial inequities, displacement. And I think at the cultural services at the Villa San Francisco, we have this conviction that we need to engage in an international and transdisciplinary dialogue to learn from each other, to translate, expertise, innovation from one country to the other, from one culture to the other, and from one practice to the other. And I think that's exactly the objective of this publication and the Oakland Saint-Denis Cooperation Project.
Juliette, I couldn't agree more. I mean, especially given all of the many tensions. Some of those tensions are creative, though, right? And it's part of the long history of our two communities actually negotiating these forces, right? So for all the things Oakland is, it certainly is, it has a fighting spirit of creative energy that has helped to define, in many cases, what we mean by the urban sort of experience in the United States, in fact. But I'm also curious, Julie, how this fits into the larger frame of the humanities, right? Which, again, we're surrounded by them, but we don't often sort of zoom out to think what's the role that they play in these negotiations.
Well, at the heart of the humanities is storytelling. It's the human condition. It's the experiences that we have with each other. And I think that this kind of bridge building between France and the US in this project really also lives at the heart of that. Let's have a chance to bring equity into the conversation. Let's talk about inclusion. Let's see how, as we work with artists in our local communities and storytellers, that we're really helping to include everybody's voices. And I think that that's a really important part of this project.
Juliette, if I can just have you sort of respond to that, because that conversation doesn't happen by accident, right? And for many Americans, they'd be surprised at the level of diversity in France, but particularly in Saint-Denis. How does that look? What's that intention look like from your perspective?
I think I would say it's individual and collective responsibility. And I think at this, facing those challenging times, we need to join forces. We need to work together. And I think that's what we do. Very different partners. Of course, Julie from California, Humanities, from France, and Légendes, Urbaines, the French American Cultural Society, the Institut Français in Paris, the French Consulate in San Francisco, and of course the two cities, Oakland and Saint-Denis. It's a long discussion bringing also together the people and the communities who are working together. And I think we're going to hear from them, from Destiny Arts, from Chimera Productions, from the Grand Paris Express, from Plaine Commune. And I think this project, it's embodies the fact that we need to, to share the responsibility and to enlarge the discussion.
Laure, may I ask you a question? This document, which is now out for the public, is extraordinary. I had a preview of it. And it makes us think more critically, but also maybe more openly about what function cities play in our lives and how they're created. Can you speak to a little bit of what was captured in the document and in the process of creating it?
Yeah, of course. So thank you very much. And I'm very glad to share this publication with you today or tonight for us. Yes, so as Juliette said, this publication is really a collective project. So the process was to involve around 35 people, in America and in France, to share their vision and their desire on how to build up a city at a human scale, how to involve artists, inhabitants, and social ventures in the process. And we try also to collect specific tools that they imagine to contribute to the common good. So we imagine the book, actually. We imagine it as a reflection on urban and artistic practices. And it is a sort of non-exhaustive, but maybe subjective inventory of new practices in the two countries. So we did a very, but we deal with that. So we project the urban for process. As we will make just after, on projects and spaces that create greater cohesion. And the second part is on various models for keeping our cultural spaces in our territory. So we've presented how the relationship between private and public organizations evolved in a way in the same direction in both of the countries. And we decided to present collective project of land trust, collective and social and cultural land trust for being able to preserve the land. So that's, yeah.
It's an extraordinary document, and it's one that, again, when normal times return to us, if you're traveling in Oakland or Saint-Denis, to put down your phones, to walk in the city, to be a part of the city with this as your guide, right, as a way of thinking, as a way of being in these places, I think is an exceptional achievement. So congratulations on that. And we have a ton of people on this webinar. So for you participants, please avail yourself of this new resource. Julie, I think we're going to get a chance to watch a short clip from part of this collaboration. Is the product, is the content that's created. I think our DJ John from the California Humanities, we're going to call him that, but Julie, you want to tee it up?
Yeah, I'm going to tee this up. So a year ago, right now, a group of us from the Bay Area were part of a learning expedition in Saint-Denis, learning about all the things that are happening in city building in Saint-Denis, learning more about the community, taking some of our Oakland learnings to that community as well. Is a really wonderful opportunity to share. And the about some of the things that are different. In learning expeditions, we had of two places to the filmmaking. So it's a 15-minute film that is available. We'll share the links, but we're going to show, I think, a short clip of this to give you a little amuse-bouche taster.
Je suis là depuis 2 ans et j'arrive de Seine-Saint-Denis. Et tout de suite, quand on veut rencontrer des artistes, on nous dit les artistes sont plus à San Francisco, ils sont à Oakland.
To me, both Oakland and Saint-Denis are cities that are incredibly diverse. They have populations from all over the world. We came together to exchange stories. These two cities are going through very similar things, maybe at slightly different times. One very simple thing that obviously both places are going through is gentrification.
What it means to be an artist in the Bay Area is that in a way you're sometimes feeling you're an endangered species because the cost of living is so high.
Similar to Saint-Denis, there's a lot of industrial spaces, warehouse spaces.
Finalement, dans les deux cas, il y a un enjeu de maîtriser le foncier, maîtriser la durabilité du bâti.
On vient du 9-3, on vient d'Oakland. On a envie de le revendiquer et on a aussi envie de montrer une autre facette de cette ville qu'on vit au quotidien. Le point de départ, c'est une conviction que faire la ville est un acte culturel. On se rend compte qu'il y a énormément de solutions qui existent.
The moment we reflect with another city, it takes us out of our bubble and makes us think, oh, this is a global thing.
That word belonging, I think, is going to be part of our conversation, not in its sort of passive hallmark sense, but in its active, creative sense. Julie, anything before we bring on the panelists in terms of how folks will be able to see that content and access it?
We have put the link in the chat, or will put the link in the chat, and there are some other links as well of all of our organizations that you can also access it. Thanks.
Great. Okay, with that, I'd love to invite our panelists to reveal themselves visually. Simón, Pierre, Sarah, Valentine, please come online here. And as you guys are getting comfortable and settled, thank you again to the attendees. Please keep the chat going. We'll add links in there as we go. Remember, this is all real time, so if something goes wrong or a dog barks or somebody freezes, it's all good. You just roll with it. And I want us to all think about our networks, right? So there's 90 people on this call. I probably recognize 30 of them. And I can imagine the next 10 people that they know. And if we go out a few orders of magnitude, we've got many, many people basically connected to the work that you all are doing. What we're gonna ask you for is just, we'll go around and do introductions. And I think some of our panelists have some content they wanna show as part of that. I think Simón, you are up first if you'd like to join us, and then I'll just kind of pass the ball around after Simón does his piece.
Hi folks, how are you? It's good to be here. Thank you all for inviting me to take part in it. My name is Simón Adinia Hanukai. I'm originally from Azerbaijan, then spent the majority of my life in the Bay Area, where I was a co-artistic director of Destiny Art Center, founding member of Headrush, and artistic director of Naked Souls Artist Alliance. And I'm now based in Paris, France. So the connection between two cities is the two places is very close to me. I'm also the artistic director of Chimera Productions, which is a live arts company based in New York City and in Paris. And the goal of our work is to create interdisciplinary performance work that ignites spaces for dialogue. And we tackle large societal questions. Each project that we make is very different from the others, but it's also each one tackles a societal question that we're dealing with. And this piece specifically that I'll mention today is called Spaces. It was initially commissioned by the Harlem Arts Festival in New York. And it was created right after the last presidential election. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of tension, even in a city like New York, which is incredibly diverse, that has pretty much the whole world represented there. When you would take the metro, there was a moment which you could feel the tension. People would look at each other and would not know who to trust. And this feeling of distrust kind of was the starting point for this project. And as we made it initially through the partnership with the Harlem Arts Festival, we had an opportunity to present the piece in this beautiful church at the center of Harlem, right across the street from Marcus Garvey Park. And when we began the work, we began to work with local residents. And the initial idea was to put the stories from the residents, to collect the stories, give them to actors and have them present it. And as we began to work, we realized that actually that filter of the actor for this specific performance is not necessary, which we removed and placed the local residents at the heart of the project. And then the glue of the piece becomes music and dance. So at that point, Juliette, who you all met a few minutes ago, the French consulate of San Francisco, was familiar about this project with this project because we began to take it to multiple cities and multiple places. In each place, recreating it brand new with local audiences, with local residents and local artists. And she invited us to take part in this collaboration, and with the possibility of presenting it both in Saint-Denis and also in Oakland. And the starting point for us for this work is always to build really strong local partners, because for these two cities I'm familiar with, but we're currently also in conversations of doing it on the island of Mozambique, of doing it in Australia, of doing it in Netherlands. And in all those places, we don't have those rich connections. So the first point was for us to find partners, and one of them is represented here with Destiny Art Center, who is also one of my artistic and collaborative homes in the Bay Area, and you'll get to hear from Sarah in a moment. So when we began this collaboration, we immediately said, okay, how do we have the two cities exchange with each other? Because these two cities are very different, but there's a lot in common. And for me, the things that really immediately popped up were obviously elements of gentrification. With Oakland, it's long and gone, and those of us who know Oakland know very much the effects of gentrification. In Saint-Denis, it's just beginning. Elements of real feeling of resistance and social justice in Oakland, as those of us who know Oakland know, the birthplace of the Black Panthers, the resistance elements of Oakland are very much there and very much present, always have been. In Saint-Denis, it's also very much a resistance. How do people fight back against feeling oppressed and feeling not like they don't have their voice heard? And finally, the other elements to us is very much strong social core in both cities. In Oakland, it's mostly nonprofit organizations that are very much present. In Saint-Denis, it's more associations, nonprofit organizations, but also public organizations, public support that's very, very strong. So one of the things I want to highlight today, and I want to play a little video in a second, is the way we began to create a collaboration between the artists of the two cities. The other thing that we do extensively is workshops with local residents around storytelling, which is how we begin to incorporate the stories into the project. But one thing is we asked the group at Destiny, which is actually Sarah, who you'll hear from in a second, Rashidi Omari, who is Sarah's current co-artistic director and who will be taking over the lead as artistic director in the future, and Masio Payomo and Rose Huey, who are both alumni of Destiny Arts. And we asked them to introduce Oakland through movement to the artists in Saint-Denis. And we give them a bunch of prompts, and we will show you a really short clip of just one response.
Yeah, let's check it out. Okay, John, on our DJ tip, you got that?
Thank you, John.
Right on.
Just to add a little bit more, this is a short clip from a longer presentation. And to me, a lot of time when we ask somebody to introduce a city, we go to statistics, we go to images, but what is art? What's the role of the arts in introducing a city and connecting to a city? What is the role of the artist to actually be the voice of the city, not just through words, but through movement, through music, through other elements? And the other important thing for us is that the venues in both cities are public spaces. They're not theater venues, they're not dance venues. In Saint-Denis, we're presenting the project in the Hall de Marché, which is a massive market space of Saint-Denis, which is one of the hearts of Saint-Denis. And the Basilique of Saint-Denis, to those who don't know the Basilique, it's literally what Notre Dame was based on, what Notre Dame was built. It was the original Basilique of that type. And in Oakland, we'll be doing this. We're collaborating with the city of Oakland, Roberto Bedoya, and doing it in City Hall of Oakland. So taking over City Hall, this space that is so much of the citizens, but often we forget because we usually don't spend creative time in that building. Because of the pandemic, we got pushed back, but we hope to present the piece next year.
Thank you. And we'll come looping back to many of these things. I want to bring in Pierre-Emmanuel. I mean, one critical difference between the two places is the approach to infrastructure in some respects, but Pierre-Emmanuel, as part of the project you represent, how it integrates between the communities around Paris and Paris itself. Can you offer a little perspective, and just so everyone knows what to expect, I'm going to go to Sarah and then Valentine after this, just to get the introductions through, but Pierre-Emmanuel.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Pierre-Emmanuel. I'm actually head of architecture, design, and culture for Société du Grand Paris, which is a public company which is in charge of the construction of the new metro lines around Paris. So we are building 200 kilometers of new metro lines all around Paris and 68 new stations, with 2 new stations in Saint-Denis. And so actually in this big project, I'm in charge of thinking about the architecture of the new stations, but also I'm in charge of developing an artistic and cultural program in link with the construction of this new network all around Paris. So in this project, I'm working in Saint-Denis with the city of Saint-Denis, with all inhabitants of Saint-Denis and also local places, local structure, associative structures, to develop actions all around the construction sites, with this idea that architecture and culture are lovers to transform our relationship to space, and also are factors of social connection between peoples, between inhabitants with the project. And I'm sure that today it's important to have this connection to the people when you are working on a big project as the Grand Paris Express, which is the name of my project. So maybe John, you can show us a map of the project. Here you have the new metro line. So you know, in Paris we have 14 existing metro lines, and we are working on the construction of 4 new lines. So lines 16, 17, and line 15, 16, 17, and 18. So we are doubled the existing network. For a main objective is to deliver the half part of the network for 2024 with the Olympic Games in Paris. So this is our project. I've told you that we are also building 68 new stations, and one main objective is to develop new connection between these stations, these 68 stations, and the neighborhoods, the communities around the stations. So in my point of view, culture is a strong levers to building this relationship, also to experimenting in the territories the upcoming arrival of the metro, and also with this new station we are building the heritage of tomorrow. It's why it's important to make sure that this new station will be beautiful stations. And it's why we are working with architects, designers, but also artists to the construction of these new stations.
Pierre Manuel, I mean, it shocks the mind in America to see such ambition with public transportation, of course. And Sarah, I'm going to lean into your piece of this also right now. But in Oakland in particular, right, the train in some cases cut culture down the middle, 7th Street corridor, where the Black community had such a thriving place, and it was used against the community in some respects, but nothing like what you guys are doing has happened in the history of the United States in terms of that integration. But this relationship, Sarah, between place and people and the idea of that place, we move through space. And one of the things that, by way of introduction, I mean, if folks don't know Destiny, it's just one of the most important institutions in Oakland. And you and your relationship to it have introduced so many important ideas and brought so many people to the conversation. So can you give us a little of that perspective? And again, this is Oakland royalty for everybody on this webinar. This is like you're getting a treat right here with Sarah. So Sarah, over to you.
Joaquin, thank you. Very humbling introduction. Before I start, because this is what we do at Destiny Art Center before we do anything, let's just all, as a community, and there's 102 of us, let's just all take a deep breath. Take a deep breath and let it out. Let's do that again. I know we need it. You've been on Zoom too many days in a row. Take a breath in and let it out. Yeah, move your shoulders. Simón, thank you. Maybe roll your neck out a little bit. Yes, I want you to be present. I always say this to my students, that let's live on the edge of our seats. And Joaquin, I appreciated you saying, like, put your phones down, you know. And Roberto Bedoya said in the film, artists are an endangered species. And so I love, Joaquin, that you said that Destiny Art Center is an institution, because it's really obsessed with having movement be part of movements for social justice. Mm-hmm. Our mission is to inspire and ignite social change through the arts. And I've been in different roles at the organization for 30 years, mostly as the artistic director. And right now I'm actually transitioning out of Destiny so I can pass the baton to the next set of incredible leaders that are at Destiny, take a little bit of that shade and shine some light onto the new leaders. So my title will be Artistic Director Emeritus, which is, I like the fist. It's sort of an interesting emblem. I never thought it would get so old as to have that title. But
don't mean anything.
In 1993, I co-founded the Destiny Arts Youth Performance Company at Destiny Arts Center, which is an award-winning now dance theater troupe that works with young people in collaboration with professional artists. And we do original performance pieces that talk about the time. I like to say that we talk about what's going on right now. And Simón and I worked together for 6 years as co-directors of that group and made some magic together. Talked about I've been like doing my reminiscing of my 30 years and have watched some of our work together. And actually we're gonna show a short video in just a moment. I'm going to tell you about the project that this is about. The short video that sort of chronicles a few of the moments before we went into shelter in place. So right before shelter in place, we were working on a project called The Black Hole, W-H-O-L-E, with the W bracketed. So it's about Black people being whole in Oakland. It's about transitions in the town of Oakland. So transitions from life to death, and we're honoring 6 young Black folks who died from Oakland before the age of 32 in different ways. And we're also talking about the transitions in Oakland in terms of gentrification, which is what a lot of this Spaces project is about. It's like looking at cities in transition and how do we, as artists, hold the stories, honor the stories of the people in the towns that we're from, especially from marginalized people. So the video, and John, thank you for being the fabulous curator, will show you just a little bit of the process of creating the Black Hole. And this clarity in your movement.
What's racism?
So what I want you to do now is fold your paper into thirds. Open it in front of yourself and look at it.
At the top line.
We all collaborate.
That's so cool.
We all have expertise, and in collaboration, we're putting that expertise together to make something bigger than we could put by ourselves.
After we move a little bit together, we're gonna expand on the altar that we started to build last night.
Awesome, Sarah. Very nice. Let me pull in Valentine. Valentine, a couple of questions. And again, this holding space, right? And Sarah, you in the film, this idea of an altar, which all cultures in Oakland have some relationship to this. My mom was a Chicana artist who did altares as part of a lot of Day of the Dead sort of artistic sort of eruption in Oakland that happens once a year. But Valentine, a question about that holding of space, and I would love a little color about the community of Saint-Denis also, because if you've never been there and you maybe only know Paris, but how does space get held in that community? And then what's the relationship of artists to challenge, to confront where that is also threatened?
Hello, my name is Valentine. I work in Plaine Commune, which is
territory gathering 9 cities north of Paris, so including Saint-Denis, but 8 others. And I conduct this cultural strategy called Territoire de la culture et de la création. So just a few words about the territory. It's 500,000 inhabitants. Many artists are here, and it is a worldly region. Very many young people are here, and indeed coming from migration movements from different communities, different countries itself, and coming mostly from working class backgrounds, which those two facts are changing actually today. And this cultural strategy is about how to involve artists in our urban planning and economic development today, saying that this territory north of Paris is really in a big urban and economic boost right now, as Pierre-Emmanuel has shown with this all this network coming, and we are experiencing this today with people who came from different time going and from different countries. So I very concretely work with operational departments, urban planning, urban design, urban renovation, and trying to support various phases of urban development with an artistic approach. So that means in the no man's land, waiting for a urban project to start, demolition, renovation, reconstruction, rehousing, from the diagnostic to the delivering stage. So we invite artists to in this urban planning, considering that this will impact the city making itself, but even more citizenship, sense of belonging, and democracy itself. It is saying that arts and culture can feed, challenge, and impact differently our way of planning the cities, and especially by engaging inhabitants in these, well, engaging differently the inhabitants in the local policies. So that's what it is. We're trying to make urban transformation meaningful for people, creating greater cohesion between people and projection in the future.
And you can share some of the photos.
Yeah,
yes?
sure. We can
Awesome.
share just one experience that we had in La Courneuve, just saying that, of course, I'm sure that this strategy is part of a greater movement, which is based on at least 3 facts. Some artists want to create in relation to a urban and social specific contexts. Second, that the public policy aiming to give access to culture is ineffective, I would say. And we need to think our cultural policies with people and not for them. And that's the second fact. The third one is that I think urban planning has changed and is yet more horizontal, involving more and more inhabitants in our decision protocols. So this is an example in La Courneuve. This is this very old and big building called Robespierre, just before it was destructed. That's 2 months ago. I think there are about 300 houses in apartments in this building. And in a urban renovation, we invited these theater artists called Random for 2 years, and they worked, well, actually, as we were rehousing people before destruction in the neighborhood, I insist, we invited these artists to actually move in. So they came for 2 years in this neighborhood, in this building, and worked with people on how to say goodbye to the home that hosted them for many years sometimes. So these artists have worked on how to make us hear the fear, the sadness, the hope as well of people moving from their historical home and not letting each of them deal with it alone, considering that, okay, the new apartments are for sure more comfortable, but by moving, you leave a part of yourself, I guess. So this is about how to create a community of people talking together of their past and future, boosting social relations and cohesion, so that people are happy to stay in the neighborhood and have these relationships.
And may I ask a question in here? And I'm going to start to incorporate some of what we're getting in the Q&A in the chat, and I'll maybe feed it out as we cycle through this. But you know, the immigrant population of both of our cities is really important to the lifeblood. It's also a very contested space in terms of immigration and pressures on immigration. And maybe between Valentine and Simón, I'd like you guys to both sort of reflect on this. How do you ensure that when you're doing this kind of like proactive engagement through the arts, right, that those different communities are not just like included, but actually have some equity and contribute equally to the process? So maybe Valentine first, and then Simón, I'd love your perspective also.
Well, you know, we're never sure about that. Of course, we try to have to see the work of artists in France and see which of them work in this institute, in this in relation to our urban and social specific context work. So, but each time it's we're not sure about that. So this company really works like that. We were sure of that, but and their specificity is that they move in the context in which they work, and that guarantees something, I guess.
Yeah, Simón, can you reflect on that also? I mean, you've seen many different communities in your experience. How do we hold that space for the new contributors and folks who otherwise might be under political or economic pressures that are unique? And I'll use as one example. I grew up in East Oakland off of High Street. It has the highest infection rates for COVID in Alameda County. It's extraordinary. And the highest within that rate are for the Mayan immigrants who have in the last 15 years really come into Oakland, and they work in construction. I mean, they work, but their infection rates are a public health crisis. So again, it's not just the normal politics of immigration with COVID and all the other dynamics and gentrification. It's harder for immigrants to have that space. But creatively, what have you seen work?
Obviously, this is probably the most complicated thing when you're creating an artist with the local community, and not for local community, but with the local community. This is probably the most complicated thing. And for me, I think there are three elements that are really important. Number one is, again, what I mentioned earlier, you really find local partners who are not, because no matter what we say, if I'm an artist, and even if I'm living there for 2 years, which I think is incredible, that's so incredible to have that opportunity, I'm still an outsider if I'm not from that community originally and initially. Then really finding local organizations, associations, people, individual artists, and really have them part of the process, and not just on the side of the process, but really part of the process. The second thing is to get out of artistic spaces and go to those areas and to those spaces, to me is really important. And then finally, just to listen. I think a lot of time as artists, and I definitely one of them, like we have our initial ideas when we come in, and often it's hard to shake them off and to actually listen locally and see what do we need. It's not what I want, but what does the community need, and try to adjust. And it's easier said than done.
Sarah, I want to sort of take that one step further, actually, because again, unless you're from the first peoples in North America, everybody has immigrated to our country, right? And for the Black migration to Oakland, which then really establishes Oakland as a Black city, which is what I grew up in, it's still an incredibly dangerous place sometimes for culture and for people. And you mentioned the project to honor 6 folks who died before 32 years of age. You know, if we go back to Fruitvale Station, right, I'm thinking about transit and Oscar Grant and the work of his mom afterwards to try to provide some justice, right? and the location specific of it, and the freedom of people of color to be in the city, right? So your movement suggests that freedom, it captures that freedom, but it is a contested space out there. So can you just reflect a little on Oakland as a place, and where those spaces are open and where you fear that they might be closing down?
I think what's brilliant about Oakland is extremely resilient city. So while gentrification is definitely encroaching on the city, there is this deep history of resistance and resilience. So public spaces like, for instance, during COVID by Lake Merritt, all of the parking spots are illegal on the weekend. So people ride their bikes or walk or park a distance away, and there are food trucks lined up for people to stay in community in a safe way. So there is this powerful resilience in what you're talking about, the immigrant community or people who migrated here, people of color. I mean, I always say when somebody says Black people are immigrants, well, not quite. Africans were brought here against their will, but the richness of the communities here is palpable, and it spills into spaces. Like, for instance, the Life is Living Festival, which was innovated by Youth Speaks and has been going on for about 10 years. We just, and Destiny Arts Center has been, had a stage at that festival. Instead of having an outdoor festival, there was a digital festival, a virtual festival over the weekend, and Destiny participated in that. And so to me, yes, gentrification, and yes, this powerful resistance to gentrification exists side by side. And I think this project with Spaces and Chimera Productions and Simón really highlights the essential nature of each of the two cities that are being talked about, right? Like when we did this physical dance representation of what mattered in Oakland, Black Power and the Black Panthers was one of the key elements of what drives the city. And I think, when George Floyd was murdered, the streets were full, right? And my students actually, some of my teen students were organizers. And so there's generations of organizing and protesting and resiliency and resistance in the streets of Oakland and in the organizations in Oakland. And the young people are picking that up and doing that work.
Yeah, I think there's having grown up in Oakland, there's a certain credential that happens of like knowing that connection between culture and the political space and the need to protect people, right? And let them have the freedom that legally, technically we should be entitled to. There's also this thing about authenticity, right? Like if you trying to fake it in Oakland, you will not make it for too long, right? Like you can do that somewhere else, but you cannot do that in Oakland. And Pierre-Emmanuel—
Saint-Denis is the exact same way.
I know, I feel that. Which this is my question for Pierre-Emmanuel. I mean, the government is doing this extraordinary project. Of course, you have the Olympics, knock on wood, it doesn't turn into Tokyo, right? You get your Olympics. But how do you negotiate when the government shows up with big plans and the community is there? What if they don't agree? What if they don't like it? What if they need to push back? How do you make that happen?
Yeah, in France, past 10 years, we have a lot of difficulties with what we call grands projets, big projects, and a lot of political movements against this type of big project. For example, an airport near Nantes was stopped just before the construction because inhabitants stopped the construction and say that they don't want a new airport near the city of Nantes. So it shows that we are in a new epoch for this type of project, and it becomes very important to work with all stakeholders of this project, inhabitants, local communities, neighbors, And actually, my company, which is a public company, spend maybe 1/3 and half of the resources of the company to deal with this objective to involve inhabitants in the project. So it shows that today it becomes very very important to install dialogue with all the territories around the station, around the new station, and all people who are living in these territories. But culture is not communication. This is for me very important. Culture is a way of empowerment, of moving people from a passive to an active mode regards to the project, but it's not communication. We have communication, we have institutional communication to share the project, to explain the project, but inviting artists to create on, for example, on the construction sites, organize big event on the construction sites. We organize 3-4 times a year big construction site parties, for example, where we invite all the inhabitants to come inside the construction sites and to discover the construction site with new regards with the artist. I think this is very different if you compare this type of action to classic or institutional communication actions. So it's a way to create links between infrastructure, between territories, between the different cities, but also with the different mayors which are elected in these different territories. So it's why we are developing this project.
You know, it's a very insightful answer. And again, some of the differences, but also similarities between the two places. Just so everyone has a sense of schedule, we don't have a hard stop at 11, but I am going to try to hit the Q&As and incorporate them into the questions. We'll linger, like it's a dinner with like, you don't have to get rushed out of the restaurant, which is more common in the US than France, of course, although not anymore, who gets to go to restaurants. But we have somebody from another city in California, Riverside, that wants to ask the question of, you know, they have a strong sister city program that focuses on economic development. And again, when we started Digital Sister Cities, it was to try to provide that extra chapter, right, that space. But how, do you have helpful suggestions in terms of focusing on culture? And Valentine, I'd like you to take a stab at that. Like, how do you incorporate culture at the core, right alongside economic development issues, which tend to be the focus of many administrations or sister city relationships?
Well, of course, at the beginning, there's a political will, local political will. And this is very important, of course, here. But after that, it's also a way of, it's creating for us a new dialogue between public actors and private actors, that is to say, urban, economic, artistic players. So we are trying to do this and to involve all these actors going to the same goal. Is that an answer? Or?
Yeah, I think will is a very important piece of it, right? I mean, it's an important one. And again, I do, just given the times we live in, right? It's like the political, social, cultural will to solve the problem of COVID is in high relief right now, right? Of course. And I think it's one maybe we can all reflect on a bit. I think part of that also, and again, just to the person in Riverside, Simón, I'd like to throw a question your way that sort of pegs off of this, which is somebody here works in translation or is doing a PhD in translation. Again, the will in one part and the other can be similar, but if they're not exactly aligned, where are some of those, where does it slip? How do you manage that? when you're building this kind of partnership? Because most people in Oakland are not, they don't grow up with French as a second language, right? And many people in France do grow up with English, you know. So it's one of our challenges as Americans, of course, bilingualism. But Simón, can you speak to that a bit in terms of generating the will, but also building the actual relationships?
I think that the starting point for our piece is actually, though it's the connection, is to try to be as honest as possible in both cities and really create something for that city. So the starting point is actually not to translate, but to initiate locally in both cities. And after that, the second part is actually to make the connection. Because I feel like if we begin with the connection, we have no idea what we're connecting. So that to me is what it begins. And so the translation is not easy. And right now we're creating these video duets with artists and storytellers from both cities. So then how do we translate it? You know, what does it mean to translate it? How do we do it honestly? Because a lot of it is also context. You know, if somebody explains their city, it tells a story from their city, everybody in that city knows the context, but the other city has no idea what that is all about. So I think a lot of it is, it has to be open to interpretation, which is why to me an artistic outlet can be possible, because it creates space for not just what the words are saying and what the research is showing, but the overall, the things around that information.
So let me get Sarah in, because we are going to lose Sarah right at the top of the hour. I mean, you built something, Sarah. You've seen it evolve, but stay true to its place and respond to the times. What can everybody who's listening in be thinking for themselves about how to protect and promote this kind of collaboration, these kinds of spaces?
I mean, that's such a big question and so important. I mean, to me, it's sort of the way Destiny started kind of tells that story. It started what I call very scrappy. So we were in storefront on San Pablo Avenue in North Oakland. Two martial artists started a center because they wanted kids to have a place where they could build community and skills that help them be safe, right? And then when they invited me to start a performing arts program, it was about continuing to have that conversation through dance and through performing arts. And I think having those relationships, like I'm sitting in my window here in North Oakland, 5 blocks from Destiny, being present in the community that you serve, living in having authentic relationships with your neighbors, right in the communities that you serve is, to me, essential. It's harder and harder to do that in Oakland because it's harder for artists to live here. And so that whole endangered species thing that Roberto Bedoya was talking about, and yet to hold true to being connected in community, to ask those questions the way this project does, to have conversations with your neighbors about racism. Like a neighbor across the street said, we put a Black Lives Matter placard in our yard. And she said, when do you think I should start, this is a white woman, when do you think I should start talking about racism with my kid? She has a 5-year-old. I said, immediately, right? And most people of color know that you have the race talk early in your life. And statistically, white folks hear about race and the issues around racism by 13. Right? So as a person who's dedicated to young people finding their voices and becoming the leaders in collaboration with the elders and the olders, start early and have authentic connections daily. Make it like a meditation, make it a mantra.
Well, you have earned your status on all of this, Sarah, and that maybe we'll land right there because you just stuck the landing beautifully. And we're going to switch into the after conversation. So I know we'll lose Sarah. We thank you for being a part of this, and
thank you so much. What a blessing.
And Julie and Juliette, Laure, if you guys want to join back in, we're kind of in bonus time here, and I'll keep trolling the bye, Sarah. The comments, I know we have also, I want to just do a shout out to Dorothy from the Oakland Library History Room. I also want to just cite in the publication, there's a great piece on the Oakland Museum of California and some work that it did to sort of respond to how to be the institution the community needed. So again, I love seeing Oakland sort of institutions show up. I have another question that I would love to pose to Juliette, just because you're here on a larger mandate remit than just this collaboration, right? And of course, the French consulate in San Francisco does a lot of things, a lot of connectedness between our economies and politics and all of that. How do you make the case for your colleagues at the consulate about why this matters? What do you say to convince them?
I think it's one thing. It's a dialogue takes time, to understand each other, to invite different point of views. I think you need first to take the time. And we have been talking about translation, words, how to create dialogue between words that just don't connect. So I think the first thing would be time, and then conviction. And I think that, and in this challenging time, I think we need solution. And I think what we realized is like there is not only one solution. It will be coming from very, the different stakeholders, the public, the private, the local communities, the artists, the politics. And I think people realize this now. And I think it's opening new windows, looking at things differently. And then you just realize that people have developed many different solutions. And I think we need to share them, to learn from each other. And I think that's because in the chat, we had many questions about how to do it. I think this publication has been designed as a toolkit, I would say. It's like just present and share the different innovation experimentation that have been developed inside the cities, inside the arts communities, inside the real estate development worlds. And I think I would say first, looking at them, learning from them, and then maybe just start to experiment by yourself what you learn.
I love the word dialogue. It's so central. And Julie, if I can just kind of out you on this, we spent about a year on the road together going across California, having dialogues with community college partners around the role of journalism in our society and in our democracy. But you don't just serve the Oakland community, Julie. You are the California Humanities, which is a quite large place. The economy is huge. The places are very different. It's diverse all over. But how do you translate this relationship out to the wider work that the California Humanities is engaged in?
Well, in my dreams, we're the California France Humanities Council, but I'm not sure how my board would feel about that. But it's been really a wonderful partnership with Juliette and everyone else. I think that one of the things that we know about California is that what happens here is watched, it's looked at. There are many things that we set trends on, and some of those things are good, some of them are not good, but we know that that what we're learning here is something that we can share with the other state humanities councils, with other organizations. We're going to be speaking about this project at the National Humanities Conference coming up. So I think that whenever there's a chance for us within California or beyond to talk about what we are learning from each other, that I think that makes us all better. We've just completed a listening tour around California as part of our field building initiative to really listen to what's going on in communities, who is doing humanities work, and why it's important, and who we should know in terms of creating a statewide humanities network. And so this is part of this as well. It's listening, it's learning, and then it's implementing.
Yeah, thank you, Julie. And I'm gonna, Laure, I have a question that I'm gonna sort of riff on something that James has put into the chat here. But he's speaking as a Latino. The survival as a people often has been the result of turbulent mixing and these cultural collisions, going back to the original mestizaje, of course, some 500 plus years old at this point. But cities are places where that mixing is possible, right? It is a place where you have the concentration, you have the cultural collision, you have some legal space protections perhaps. But in the age of COVID, and again, James, you'll forgive me if I take a little liberty here, the whole notion of gathering is at stake, right? The whole notion of what a city performs is at stake. And many companies, especially tech companies, are saying, you don't ever have to come back to a place, right? You work from home. Like, are we compromised right now in what we can do, what canvas a city provides us? what's your perspective? Small question.
Yeah. I don't think it's a compromise. I would say it's a very humble, how do you say? Yeah, humble way of working with people, and it takes long time. And sometimes you don't have the good solution for every issues, but just you try to answer some questions, some needs, and that's the first step. So it needs to be a question of confiance. How do you say? To be confident between people, and to try to explore different ways of making the city.
Yeah, Valentine, if you're still able to come online again, I know we're after hours here with our webinar, but my trip, when I've been to Saint-Denis, I've always been just overwhelmed with how much presence on the street there is, right? How much life on the street there is. And again, with the pressure of COVID, and again, you have this enormous infrastructure project around you with the Olympics and all of that. How are you guys negotiating during the pandemic?
Well, people are still in the streets because apartments are too small. I mean, what can you do? People haven't moved for holidays this summer. They stayed here. Apartments are too small. Families are big, so people are in the streets. And the crisis is terrifying, and the cases are I think it's the worst. I'm sorry, the worst case in France. So it's terrible. We do not manage it. We can't.
Have you seen culture step up and try to help navigate it, try to help manage?
Try, of course, yes, trying different ways of playing culture, artistic and culture in these cities, trying to reinvent themselves. Yes, definitely. But it's getting worse and worse because we cannot be in public spaces anymore. We cannot be more than 10 in public spaces, so it's getting even more hard. But the theaters and cultural places are still open, so we count on that. But we're starting from far, I would say. So of course, in this case, it's going to be really hard for culture as an economic sector and also as a social object.
Yeah, I will just highlight, and of course you guys probably know it, but Creative Growth is in Oakland. It's one of the great arts institutions in the world, in my opinion. It's an art studio and gallery for adults with disabilities, but it kind of emerges out of this big state level action to deinstitutionalize adults with disabilities who all end up home. And then again, like it often happens with creative ideas, somebody starts something and then it grows and then it expands. And it actually has a strong presence in France, and they had a gallery in the 10th for a while. But Simón, you've been involved with Destiny, which again is another one of those kinds of institutions. When it starts, Oakland was not what it is today, right? Oakland was very depressed for generations. There was very little development downtown. There was no building. There was no pressure on that. It was more pressure in terms of like how we were dealing with criminal justice, frankly. And so that resiliency to see through the different eras, to help and to be a resource when there's a crisis like we have now. What's the thing you learned by your time in Destiny in terms of how to maintain that creative force, even when the conditions are very difficult? And I might wrap up on this one because I don't see a lot more in the Q&A, but if anybody wants to add afterwards, but Simón, to you.
Yeah, I think again, to me, it heads back to the people that you're working with. I think through our work at Destiny and through what we continue to do with our project with Kaimera, the goal is connecting with people and with being with people in the room, in the street, in the spaces, in the different spaces, and engaging them in ways that are listening to them and reflecting back to them. So to me, the reason Destiny has thrived after all these years is constant adaptation. It's constantly listening to what's needed and evolving and growing and growing and growing. And I think that that's what any association and community needs to be doing, especially in moments like this where there's a lot of turbulence, you know, in both societies and both sides. So I think to me, it's listening, it's adjusting, it's being present. And I'm glad that Sarah started us with that breath, because it is to slow down, shut the hell up sometimes and take a breath, and then seeing what's going to happen next and be open to it.
Well, I would offer, if anybody wants a closing note, Juliette, anything as we wrap?
Maybe next step. I think it's thinking about, so the publication is available on the digital version on the website, and I think the link was put on the chat. And then you can also order it for to get a print version. And with with California Humanities, we want to enlarge the conversation, to involve more and more communities from both cities, from Oakland and Saint-Denis, but also to start the discussion with other cities in the US, in France, but also internationally. So today it's the first event of a series, of a conversation series. So we're just trying to enlarge the conversation, thinking about different formats, see how we can, do on online, go on film festival, go on other conferences, go inside schools and talk with kids and just enlarge the conversation. So if you are interested, please, contact us and we can imagine something.
Laure, any final notes?
Let's try together to create more bridges between our countries, and let's develop new artistic cooperation. So that's a call for artists here in Saint-Denis and in Plaine Commune and in Oakland too.
Awesome. And Valentine?
I totally agree with what Juliette said about how arts and culture have to be part of our successful way of making cities. I'm really convinced with that, and especially involving people.
Yeah, and my advice to anybody who's on the attendees just listening in and curious, I would reach out. Like, I'll just tell you guys right now, I've always been amazed at the energy in Saint-Denis and in the 19th. There's communities in and around Paris, but really, I mean, you guys got it going on, and I just think the openness is incredibly important right now. And before I turn it over to Julie, I just want to thank the California Humanities again, thank the consulate, thank everybody who's been involved with helping to bring us to this point. There are incredible resources already developed as a result of this, and it's a little bit of a blueprint. And again, if you're in another city, another community, be proactive, be creative about it. But just one of the great partners I've had is Julie. The work of the California Humanities spans many different spaces, but all of it has a spine of authentic engagement. That's a unique resource. So Julie, you can close us out.
Je veux dire merci à nos collègues en France. It's really wonderful to have all of you here and to be part of this really wonderful global partnership. A particular shout out to Juliette, who has been the brains behind all of this and has really pulled all of us together. But really looking forward to continuing the conversation, not only with all of you here, but anyone that you can connect us with as well. It's, as Juliette says, we want to continue to expand the conversation. Thank you, Joaquin, as well, for guiding us through this conversation, and to everybody who has joined us today.